Welcome to LUTV News InFocus, where we feature interesting topics on campus, in the community, and in the world of culture. I am Jonathan Tippett. Lamar University alumnus Nick Lampson has dedicated his life to education and the service of others. He served 2 separate tenures in the United States House of Representatives that lasted a total of 10 years. Since his time in political office, Lampson has given his time to assist several causes. He wrote The Death of Washington's Democracy, a book that tackles gerrymandering and redistricting. Congressman Lampson is here to share insight on his book, his over 40 years in elected office, and why students should be more engaged in the political process. Congressman Lampson, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I am excited to have you here. So,
thank you.
Let's start with what I just mentioned in the intro. Student journalists are just kind of starting to get their footing in the world. They're dipping their toes into the waters of news. How would you suggest that they approach politicians and politics in general?
Just be interested in it, one. Take the opportunity to meet local candidates for office, whether it's someone running for precinct chair or city council or school board. And if you ever have an opportunity to participate in an event where a higher office holder will speak, take that advantage. And I give you an example. I was president of the student body here at Lamar, and during that same period, I was an officer in a statewide student organization. And one of the meetings that we held, the governor of Texas at the time, John Connally, was our keynote speaker. I wanted to ask the same question you just asked me of him. How did you know what you wanted to do when you grew up? And so I waited until everybody had shaken his hand and said hello, and I said, will you talk to me for a minute, Governor? And I asked that question. He took me off to the side of the room and took the time to talk to me. The elected officials will reach out to interested people, so take the time to take the chance and just ask, what can I do? And get involved in something. There are a lot of civic organizations that would love to have your help.
Right now, not only are journalists, especially student journalists, approaching this world of uncertainty because they're new and they don't really have their place eked out in the journalism world yet. We're also approaching a world where news is being continually distrusted. We live in the fake news era of anti-media sentiments on social media and protests and all over the place. How would you also give some advice to these student journalists who are approaching a world that almost distrusts media as a whole?
Well, first of all, be the opposite. Do everything you can to tell the truth, do the research, dig for the real story, not the one that is easy to get, the one that someone tells you about. I think we fail to take the time to verify the accuracy of information that we get, particularly on social media. It's too easy to click a button and share it with all of our friends, and that's how bad information, misinformation gets spread and documented. So be cautious, thoughtful, and be diligent in researching these issues.
And what happens when you're not? What happens whenever you're reaching for the low-hanging fruit, or you're just kind of going along with the flow?
Don't do that. Change begins with me. I have said very, very often, and I will make every effort that I possibly can to make sure that I do those things. If I make a mistake, then I'll own up to it. Come back and say I was wrong. This was not accurate. This was not good information. But if we don't begin to correct it, if we don't begin to each one of us change our way of doing things and make sure that we are putting truth and truthful information, accurate information out, then it's going to continue to deteriorate, and we've got to turn that around.
Right now, there is a big media, social media, even just social, you could say, talking point that partisanship biases and the line between the left and the right, Republicans and Democrats, has become more severe. Is this a media talking point, or is this really happening?
This is real. And I watched it change. I lived a lot of the change. It had begun, in my opinion, back in probably the 60s and 70s, soon after World War II. and things changed and began to change more and more rapidly. Into the 70s, there were a group of political activists, if you will, in the South who came together to help ultimately elect Ronald Reagan, and through that, a number of checkpoints in law got repealed, antitrust laws, for example. Those changes that brought about were there for the laws were there for a reason. The rules were there for a reason, as to protect the citizens, to make sure that the media did tell the truth, and that there was a recourse in the event that it happened. Well, when you did away with equal time and truth in advertising and changed the ability for very few people to own great amounts of media, it began to pull us away, because instead of hearing truthful information, you would get someone's opinion. That opinion grew into the radio and TV talking heads that have really changed the politics of America. And as we did, we began to decide not about an issue and where I felt on an issue, but I adopted the opinion of the person who spoke their opinion, and whose opinion was reinforced by a friend of mine. Okay, so all of a sudden, you hear it 2 or 3 or 4 times, and this must be right. Therefore, that's what I think, and that's what we'll go with. That's what we've got to be cautious with. That's what's dangerous to our democracy.
You think it's the repetition effect a little bit? People, if you hear something saturated enough, then it can start to influence you?
Oh, it absolutely does. There is no question about it.
So, in your book, you point out how not only is gerrymandering a problem, but this has led to just less and less competition in individual districts. Tell me a little bit about why that process is so toxic.
Because of what it ultimately does to the overall electoral process. Gerrymandering for political purposes is done to control the numbers or the balance of power in the House of Representatives. Each of the congressional districts, we've typically had periods of time when the country was more one political direction than another, and it would swing back and forth. As time went on, we began to realize that one way for a party who is in the minority to win the majority is to have enough votes to put them in the majority. And they found out that, wow, I can craft districts that will guarantee the election of a Democrat or guarantee the election of a Republican in this situation. If I draw the boundaries and put a lot of Republicans in here and make it a majority Republican district. That was the case in 2000, actually 1999, 2000. The Republicans' majority that they won in 1992, 1994 began to wane. By 1996, I was one of the ones that had defeated one of the Republicans that took out the Democrat. Huge flip in 1994. As they were losing their strength, they realized we've got to find an innovative way. We're not reaching the public in the way we wanted to, so we're going to have to force our system to work for us. Well, Tom DeLay, who was the majority leader of the House of Representatives and a major fundraiser for the Republican Party, saw Texas as an opportunity. That's where he was from. The statewide offices had already mostly flipped from Democratic to Republican. The Senate was a Republican-controlled body in Texas, and he saw an opportunity to change the Texas House of Representatives, gain total control of the government in Texas, thereby giving them the ability to craft those boundaries that they wanted and force the districts on the public. And what it did was that it kicked people like me out. I was a moderate, and replaced in a 70% Republican performing district by someone who had very far right viewpoints. And so it really drove us apart. Instead of having an election where there was real competition in the election and a Democrat would have to pull a few Republicans over to get elected or vice versa, this turned out to be a 70% district where there was hardly a chance for a Democrat to beat a Republican. So we elected the most conservative Republican And in Democratic districts, the most liberal Democrat, those people can't find the middle. They're so far apart that you can't. We've got to realize that it's through compromise, it's through civil discourse, through action of being willing to be open-minded and listen to the ideas of your opponent that pulls us to find a solution, which is always in the middle.
We're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much. And thank you for watching LUTV News.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan.
You want to show your book? Here, show the book real quick. Show the title, The Death of Washington's Democracy.
With a question mark.
Yeah, with a question mark.
I'm not saying that it's dead. We were bordering on changing it.
Question mark. So thank you for joining us, Congressman
You're welcome.
Lampson.
Thanks.
And thank you for watching LUTV News. To see more content from LUTV News, follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook.